Indiana this weekend, taking part in the last installment of the Crossroads Classic against Notre Dame. They've already announced a replacement for that, and a replacement I think a lot of people are happy to see, a home-and-home series with Kansas. But they will take on Notre Dame this weekend. Notre Dame coming off of a big win over Kentucky, so they're going to be fired up because they would love nothing more than to wrap this series up with a win over Indiana after beating Kentucky.
Yeah, I mean, you know, in some ways you almost feel like Notre Dame beating Kentucky was good for Indiana. You know, it gets your attention if you're Indiana that Notre Dame beat Kentucky. On the other hand, I looked at that game. I mean, Notre Dame is one of the worst teams in the country in opponent three-point percentage, and Kentucky was 2 of 19 from behind the arc in that game. So, you know, I'm not saying Notre Dame didn't earn its win, but it does feel a little bit like one that kind of went against the grain of expectation, you know, based on what both of those teams you would have expected them to do going into the game. Kentucky's not a great three-point shooting team, but literally if they just shot 25% from behind the three-point line, you know, they would have won the game. So it's good for Indiana, I think, in the sense that it gets their attention. And you're not taking Notre Dame lightly. But on the other hand, you know, at least of what we know of Notre Dame so far, and again, these are the sorts of things where, like, we say this now, then Notre Dame beats Indiana, and we say, boy, that's not a great loss for Indiana. And then Notre Dame, you know, it turns out they've turned some weird corner and they go on, you know, and finish third in the ACC. And then we look back and we say, well, that was an acceptable loss for Indiana. You never want to draw too many conclusions, but, you know, from where we are right now, from what we have right now, if you're looking at Notre Dame, you know, I think you can, I mean, they lost to Texas A&M. You know, they lost ugly to Boston College. They lost by 16. I think they were down by 20 plus at one point in that game. So the Kentucky win gets your attention if you're IU, but also maybe feels a little bit like an outlier if you're, you know, kind of trying to figure out the matchups in a game that I think Indiana should be favored in.
Dylan?
Yeah, that was what I was going to say, is that as someone who like has a passing understanding of where Notre Dame sits in terms of their basketball program, before that Kentucky win, it seemed like Mike Brey was like on a fairly hot seat, and he still is on there. So it does seem like a lot of Notre Dame people think it was an outlier. And I guess the question for me is, how does Indiana rebound against this team? Because they have two guys who are 6'10" that can get on the boards, and they have some pretty big guards I think are going to make things difficult for Indiana. So do you think that is a matchup that Indiana can hold its own in, or do you think that's going to be an issue?
I mean, I think it's, again, if you look at the wider statistics, Notre Dame is a decent rebounding team. They're very good at keeping teams off the offensive glass. I don't think that's necessarily something that's – I mean, Indiana has actually quietly gotten good in that area, and that's not just – you know, that's not just against bad teams. I mean, they had 14 offensive rebounds against Syracuse. You know, they had I think they had 8 against Nebraska, which is a decent number. That Indiana has quietly – they had 14 at Wisconsin. Wisconsin's not usually a team that struggles to keep opponents off the offensive glass. Notre Dame statistically does keep opponents off the offensive glass. I don't think that Indiana needs those extra rebounds to win games, maybe to win this game. I think what probably that does for Indiana more than anything else is balance out the turnovers. You know, the possessions you're wasting with some of your carelessness in turning the ball over, you're making up for on the back end a little bit with some extra offensive possessions off rebounds. But my point is, I don't think it's central to Indiana's offensive identity. I don't think Notre Dame is elite at it. You know, it's hard for me to kind of make sense of exactly what Notre Dame is. I covered Mike Brey teams for a year or two early in my career. They're usually a lot more offensively efficient than this. I mean, like, you know, this is a Notre Dame team that scored more than 72 points once in a game, and that was against Chaminade. I mean, like, if you look at some of Brey's best teams, and even, frankly, maybe not even some of his best teams, but just most of his teams are really, really good offensively. Now, this one's posting some good team-wide offensive or efficiency numbers,
I was
But
going
it's
to
not
say they're
so
still like 24th in the Ken Palms, aren't they? or
Yeah,
something like that?
so they're efficient, but they're not high scoring. And when they've come up against basically anybody that can go toe to toe with them offensively, they've lost. I mean, again, Kentucky being the one exception, and that's a game where you would have expected Kentucky to shoot a lot better than 2 of 19 from 3. They didn't. Literally, all it would have taken was Kentucky making 2 of those threes, and they win the game. At least, in terms of just mathematically speaking. So it's kind of hard for me to know quite what to make of Notre Dame, other than I think there are some things you can probably draw. It's a fairly short bench. Mike Bray always has fairly short benches. It's one where you're going to have a couple guys that can hurt you from 3-point range. And we'll see about whether or not Indiana can kind of has trouble with their size. I don't know that Notre Dame is built to rebound at an elite level, and I don't know that while Indiana actually quietly has been rebounding well, I don't know that it's like central to their offensive needs, so to speak, any more than, again, I think what it does for them, maybe at both ends of the floor, is compensate for the turnover issues, which is really Indiana's great weakness right now.
How important is this one? This is not a high-profile game, but it's after losing to Syracuse and losing to Wisconsin with the 22-point lead, the importance of winning this game for a lot of different reasons, whether it's mental, whether it's for the optics for other people. How important is it for Indiana to win last installment of the Crossroads Classic? You can throw a lot of stuff in there. How important is it for Indiana to win this game?
I mean, I think they just need it from an NCAA tournament perspective as much as anything else. I just think, Notre Dame probably, I mean, at this point, certainly is not tracking toward the NCAA tournament, but history tells us that Mike Bray's a good enough coach, and the ACC is a deep enough league that they'll get enough wins to generally stay afloat in terms of what the win looks like on your tournament resume. It's all right that you didn't beat Syracuse, and Wisconsin is its own thing because it's in conference play. But this team needs, number one, to start getting a feel for winning away from Assembly Hall. And I think we all know that Saturday's game is bound to feel a lot like a home game in Indianapolis. It always does in this event. But still, I think this team intangibly needs to start feeling what it's like to win in a foreign locker room, a foreign shooting environment, a different floor, a different just everything. And then from just a resume perspective, Indiana knew it was only really going to have 3 big resume building opportunities here in the non-conference. It took care of St. John's at home. It lost close to Syracuse on the road. And again, there's not a lot of shame in that. Obviously, they I think they'd be a lot better off if they won it, but still, you lose in double overtime on the road at Syracuse. You should still be able to sleep at night with that. But you got to win this one. You had to go into this non-conference stretch thinking, A, we can't drop a game we shouldn't lose. And so far, they haven't even really come close, other than maybe the Eastern Michigan game. And B, we got to get 2 or 3 of these games that are resume builders. And that's where I think this just kind of is. I think they've just got to have it from a resume perspective, because this is a game you don't have to go chasing in conference play. This is a game that you don't have to sort of think like, well, geez, we better win at Iowa on January 13th, or we better find a way to go win at Maryland on January 29th because we didn't get Notre Dame. And you don't want to be into January and February thinking that way. You just don't want to be going into the last couple months of the season actually having to think in concrete terms. We need this game. We need this game. We need to do this and this and this. If you're Indiana, you win this game and there's an open road to being 12-2 when you host Ohio State on January 6th. And then you can really start talking about building momentum into the business end of the season.